This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast. I'm Carl Joern, field agronomist from Northwest Indiana and Northeast Illinois for the April 9th edition of the podcast here today. Joined as always by Brian Schrader and Ben Jacob, my colleagues and co-hosts. Today, we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Tommy Butts of Purdue University Weed Science Program. And Tommy has been kind enough to share with us a little bit of his time today as we're sitting here, as y'all are listening to this, with wet fields, colder than normal April forecast, and maybe feeling a little bit behind in terms of spring field work. So with that, Dr. Tommy Butts, welcome to the podcast. Looking forward to getting acquainted with you and our listeners understanding a little bit more about what you have to offer in terms of a program from your new appointment here. But with that, could you give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I appreciate the intro, talking about how everybody's probably a little depressed with the wet weather and feeling behind and cold and everything else. Because I always like to say, as a weed scientist, I'm the second most depressing person in agriculture, right behind an ag economist. So I guess it's fitting that I'm on this week, I guess, out of all the weeks. But that being said, so like you mentioned, my name's Tommy Butts. I'm a relatively new extension weed scientist here at Purdue. So I started last year in April. So I've been here a year now. But I've kind of been around about the country, over the last few years. So I'm originally a Wisconsinite, grew up there on small dairy farms and in that kind of realm of agriculture. Definitely learned that milking cows every day was not the life for me. So wanted to find something else to do outside of that, but stay in agriculture. So I did my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, a small D3 school in the southwest part of the state. From there, I did my master's degree in weed science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, working mainly all encompassing on the pigweed, so waterhemp and red root and a little bit on palmer and all that kind of fun stuff. So doing some resistance screening and management things there. Once I finished that up, I went and did my PhD out in western Nebraska, where I got to do anything and everything application technology-wise. So my main project focused a lot on the pulse width modulation sprayers, so the pulsing sprayers. So I know pretty much every nook and cranny on those kinds of things and how they work and operate and pro tips and everything for those. But I also got to work a lot with different nozzles and adjuvants and just, improving our applications as much as possible, basically. After that, I was hired on by the University of Arkansas, and I spent about 6 years as a faculty member down there working in soybeans and rice, actually. So rice is a major crop in Arkansas. And so I got to learn a whole lot about different cropping systems and southern agriculture and everything else, and enjoyed my time down there from that standpoint, and did a lot of extension work down there as well with growers and consultants and everything. And then, like I mentioned, just this last year, I got to join Purdue University. My title here is technically site-specific weed management. And so I look at that as covering anything and everything technology-wise. So drones, the John Deere See and Spray and other detect and remove systems, robotics, all that kind of fun stuff falls into my realm. But along with my extension appointment, I'm also doing a fair bit of the applied weed science work as well. So the herbicide evaluations and other applied, down to earth weed science stuff as well for the day to day that we need to take care of our weeds. So kind of all encompassing, I guess, is what I would say.
Yes, excellent. Well, when I think of, like you said, site-specific weed management for other folks, they're probably thinking this is the science fiction side of weed management, like you said, the pulsating, modulating sprayers, see and spray technology, drone applications. And I thought it was interesting. You mentioned robotics. Tommy, when you're thinking about your program, how far into the crystal ball are we looking here? Is this a 5-year time horizon? How are you kind of deploying your resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm trying to, like any good farmer, I like to say, I'm trying to manage the risk, right? And space things out, not put all the eggs in one basket. And so, Basically I see some that are, within a couple year time frame, some that are a little bit longer, and then some that are kind of way out there, right? So the drones, for example, I think in the next couple of years, there's a huge opportunity there, either from the imaging, identification standpoint or from the spraying standpoint, right? A little bit of both on that front. When you start talking the robotics, we have some of that capability already, but getting it, to be quicker, to identify weeds better, and kind of, be able to maybe do some of the swarming things. Yeah, now you're talking 5 to 7 years down the road, and then there's a handful of other things that are probably pipe dreams, but you got to start laying the foundation now to get to some of those things later. So it's kind of a whole realm of things. I actually gave a talk, it's been a few weeks ago now, but I had an audience member say when I was talking about some of this technology stuff, that it's basically like we're in kindergarten. And we're learning all this stuff, and we're on this ground floor, and we have to build all of these things, these foundational levels, right? And so it's like, well, just think 10 years from now when we're going to be in high school, what this stuff is going to look like. And so I love that analogy. I told him I was going to steal it because it's a great way to look at it. Like, we're at this foundational level, but man, tech is changing so quick and so fast at this point, and there's so many startup and venture companies and everything else. Good night. 10 years from now, who knows what we're going to be dealing with.
So what's the current state, Tommy? I mean, when you talk about these robots, for those of us that maybe aren't familiar with those specifically, we see drone technology and understand that at least at a very elemental standpoint in terms of application. But when we talk about robots, what are we really talking about when it comes to weed science?
Yeah, there's kind of a whole range of different things, right? So you may be familiar with the Solon F-Tech Solex robots right here in Indiana. So those are set up where they're fully autonomous, and they're basically mini spray rigs, right? So it's a 40-foot boom, like a 40-gallon tank. It's got cameras on the bar to find the weeds and only spray where it detects weeds. And it just roams the fields, right? Autonomously spraying kind of thing. So there's options like that. There's some other options currently that are being built where, it's smaller units that maybe fit between, say, 30-inch rows, right? And you just release them and they can navigate down every individual row pass. And there you start thinking, okay, well, we probably need swarms, right? I got to have 5 or 6 if we're going to really kind of cover acreage or something like that. But if we can have the speed and you release 5 or 6 and they stay in a field, right? Maybe, like, I look at it as you've got some of those fields that might not be next to the home farm, right? You got to travel some distances. Well, maybe we can cut down on some travel time and save ourselves, and we just have these robots handling those fields. So there's a whole gamut of opportunities there. And as far as weed control goes, man, there's research going on everything, whether it's lasers, to try and kill weeds, whether it's little tillage events, little, weed eater lawnmower things. Like, basically, you think of it, we could kind of strap it onto these things and start trying to control weeds, which is really beneficial too from a resistance standpoint, right? Just using different tools out there, still using our herbicides, but if we can mix it up, man, that's going to go a long ways on some of that too.
That's right where my mind goes is, a lot of our focus in terms of a weed management conversation over the last 5 years has all been about chemical weed management, but you're getting back to cultural practices, mechanical events. This is a way to kind of go back to the pre-Roundup era of, really using a holistic approach. Tommy, you'd mentioned in your time in Nebraska working on the different pigweed species. Any key learnings from out there? It might have predated somewhat what the industry is using today in terms of post applications, but any fundamentals that you would bring to mind for folks as you reflect on what 2025 is setting up to be with respect to weed management, specifically on the pigweeds?
Yeah. Oh, man, nobody likes when I say this, I don't think, but really it goes back down to the same thing over and over again. And wherever I've been, it's basically been the same message. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Arkansas, to get ahead of pigweeds, it's basically always the same message: residuals, 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 right? Like, you got to get out in front of them. You got to use some of those MOAs that we can't use over the top. And so the more that we can get those residuals out and then hopefully overlap residuals before more weeds come up, like, that's the best way to get ahead of pigweeds, and then also just limit the potential, for finding that one plant that has the genetic trait for resistance. If we can limit how many we're spraying post, we're just better off in the long run. And I will say too, most of the time, whether it was in Arkansas or Nebraska or wherever, generally speaking, we just get better, more consistent control out of our residuals too, right? Than our posts. Like you never really hear somebody completely say, oh yeah, that residual completely failed on me, right? Unless you just didn't get any rain and nothing got activated, then maybe. But for the most part, you never hear that. Man, we get those complaints all the time, right? From a post application where, oh yeah, it didn't work at all, or I got like a 50% kill and I had to go respray again and whatever else. So like the more that we can get those pre's and residuals out there, especially if it's a little earlier when we have a better shot of getting them activated, that's the best way to go to get ahead of pigweeds. No matter if we're talking water hemp, palmer, whatever it is, that's always the best way.
Perfect. Water hemp, palmer, those are the two key weeds that are really giving us challenges these days. When you were in Arkansas, I think of that being as like one of the hell holes for weed management, just in terms of being, really, really challenging in terms of, multi-way resistance. What was your rule of thumb in terms of duration between residuals? You mentioned the term overlapping residuals. How long should a guy wait from when the sprayer parks the first time to when it should be fired back up again to go across the same acre the second time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I feel bad for the Arkansas folks because, yeah, it is always it takes the brunt of all the jokes. And it's always where I like to say herbicides go to die. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the environment, if it's just, the rotations, what it is. But man, yeah, it is a rough area down and especially in Northeast Arkansas. There is just a lot of problems right now. West Tennessee, too. If Larry Steckel at all happens to listen, I like to blame him for a lot of Arkansas's problems. I tell him that it's all coming from Tennessee. So anyway, in Arkansas, our recommendation always was, 10 to 14 days to get back out there and do your overlap and pass. And that's a tight window. But with how bad some of those palmer areas were down there, and just like you mentioned, right, some of the levels of resistance, we had some populations that were getting up to like 6-7 way resistance. And so at that point, it's like, well, you have no other options. You can't let them get out of the ground. So we were always at kind of a 10 to 14 day down there. Now in Indiana, I think we could probably push that a little bit longer, right? We don't have as many heat units that we're getting in a short amount of time. We have bad problems, but it's not that bad problem, right? It's not Arkansas level bad problem. Yes. So, I would tend to say like more 14 to 17 day, 21 is probably starting to push it. Especially it depends on the weather a lot, but generally that's kind of where I would fall more, especially if I wanted a true overlapping pass where no weeds have come out of the ground yet. It's probably looking at like that 14-day window. If I'm going to try and do the application where I'm doing a post plus a residual and I'm killing small weeds and then laying down more residual, then maybe 21, but that's kind of your buffer zone, I guess.
Tommy, do you have a recommendation on, those layered residuals? Do you want to see a particular group or MOA go out first with something coming back? Do you have some preferences there that you like to direct folks to follow?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's one of the research projects I want to do in the near future, because I don't think we have great data necessarily on like that timing, right? Or if there's a preference one versus another. I can tell you, in soybeans, based on some data that I've looked at recently from the Climate Office and Austin Pierce, I would almost, and this is just completely anecdotal, again, we need the research data to support this yet, but in soybeans, it almost looks like I think we would be better off putting, say, dual magnum up in our original pre-emergence shot, because it requires more water to get activated, like half an inch or even a little bit more. And in some of our climates within the state of Indiana, we have a better chance at getting a half an inch of rainfall within 7 days earlier in the year. And actually, like here at TPAC, so just south of Lafayette, we pulled some data. And from the second half of May to the first half of June, basically a whole month time frame in there, but the second half of May, the first half of June, it's right at, if we're lucky, a 50% chance of getting a half an inch of rain within 7 days. And that's 20 years of historical data. So, that's pretty solid, estimate that it's about a coin toss, right? Whereas before that, it's about a 60% chance. And so I like the idea of getting dual first because it requires more water. And then if we're doing an overlap and residual, then I think Zidua might be the better option there because it requires a little less water, still really effective for pigweeds. Both of them are, right? So again, that's anecdotal, just kind of based on looking at climate data and precipitation amounts needed to activate. But it makes sense in my mind that may be our better opportunity to get our overlapping residual activated. In corn, we can kind of play those same games with the group 15s, but man, atrazine is always just the number one, king in corn. And so I just am always, as long as we can get atrazine and an HPPD out there together, because those two, synergize each other. We need those together at this point. But as long as you can get those out there, corn generally, we can take care of it a lot easier on that front.
Tommy, I'm curious, you're, as you're driving around the Lafayette area, just like me here in the last handful of days, you're seeing a lot of purpling up of fields, purple dead nettle, henbit, things of that nature. With a wet forecast, we had some hairy fields, this last spring in 2024. Thoughts on managing those weeds, or why it's important to help, consider management before the month of April to safeguard against some of those species?
Yeah, well, so first thing I would say is if I listen to my daughter, she'd tell me to never spray any of the purple flowers out there. So she gets pretty depressed to see all those purple flowers disappear here in a little bit. But that being said, there's the henbit and the purple dead nettle. There's not great options when we're trying to deal with them in these crazy turbulent springs that we have. The plus side is a lot of times they're not super competitive, right? And so once we can get out there, they're not going to affect our crop a whole lot. And as long as we can get a good burn down on them at the time, even right up until planting, we should be in pretty darn good shape with some of those things. Roundup, 2,4-D, dicamba, stuff like that, all that's pretty good depending on whatever technology you're going into. The main thing I always like to tell folks is just watch your weather, so like this week, not an ideal time to be trying to make applications on some of that stuff. One, it's wet. Right, we probably got a lot of dew sitting on those weeds. That's not conducive to killing weeds. When we're freezing at night, they're not actively trying to grow and take in herbicides and stuff. So it's just kind of like throwing money out the window at that point, because it's just not going to get into the plant and kill it super effectively either. So, I like to tell guys, catch a window where you're at least 50 degrees during the day and you're not freezing at night, and you have that about a week. And then most everything that we're using should kill a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, the purple weeds I'm not too concerned about. There's some across the Midwest, there's some more ryegrass that starts popping up that I'd be a little bit more concerned with and challenging to kill, because that stuff, again, coming from Arkansas, right? We always talk about, we had 3-way resistant ryegrass down there where we lost the group 2s, so the ALSs, we've lost glyphosate, and we're starting to lose clethodim in some spots. And so if you start losing those things, there's not too many options left to kill ryegrass either. So, and we're hearing a few more complaints scattered across the whole kind of corn belt with that a little bit. So I'm trying to keep an eye on that one a little bit more and make sure we get those grasses killed out still effectively. But again, it's playing the weather game and make sure we can get that weather right to maximize those herbicides.
Very good. Tommy, this has been a fun-ranging conversation, very applied, as we just went through there with managing henbit, purple dead nettle, chickweed species early in the year. Then we've also got you serving as the canary in the coal mine, right? You've come from a place that is maybe what we could be in a decade if we don't actively manage our weeds appropriately. And then we also got to peer into the crystal ball a little bit. I want to take us back there. A lot of conversations this winter about folks evaluating whether or not purchasing a drone for their operation makes sense. Usually from the perspective of, well, if I have the flexibility to get my fungicide on when I want, that's the primary use case for it. But maybe tell us how a grower should evaluate the potential applications that, with respect to herbicides, from a regulatory standpoint, from a feasibility standpoint. Would you advocate for this makes sense now, or sit on the sideline for another 5 years when you get to that? I believe you use the term swarming of some of this other technology. Just your thoughts in that department. I think a lot of growers would welcome.
Yeah, so great question. And unfortunately, I'll probably have to take the politician's way out of it and say it depends on a lot of things. But I will say, so just starting off with where the drones are at, if I like a lot when there's somebody that's already in agriculture that understands applications that wants to get into the drone business. I think they make that transition a whole lot easier. Some areas where we've had people that were, drone enthusiasts or pilots and never sprayed a chemical in their life, and now they're trying to get into the spray industry. That's a whole nother hard lesson to learn. There's a lot more to learn on that side of the world, right? Like what rates do we use? How do you mix? What the timings are, what herbicides kill what weeds, all of that. It just gets very complicated in a hurry. So, if it's a farmer or a grower that's looking to get into it, that has some spare time to learn how to operate a drone and go through some of the airspace regulations and things, I think it's a good opportunity for certain areas. Now, again, it depends on the farming operation, though, too. I don't see drones replacing, a ground rig, right? I don't see them replacing aircraft completely, manned aircraft completely. But I think they have some solid fits, right? So if you have some really irregularly shaped fields or some really poor sloping fields that are tough to get into, if it's again, this spring, prime example, right? It's wet. It's going to be tough to get into some fields with a ground rig until several weeks later. Well, maybe we can throw the drone out there and spray it, and get stuff killed and still kind of stay on top of it, that once it does dry up, we don't have to spray and plant. We can just go plant, kind of thing. So I think it has fits, but I definitely would kind of temper the expectations that, yeah, we're going to cover every single acre with it. I don't think we're there yet. As far as their effectiveness, I was pleasantly surprised. I really thought there was no way that they could work from a weed control standpoint when we're spraying, 2 gallons to the acre and trying to kill weeds with it. I've been pleasantly surprised. In most of our studies, we have been consistently killing weeds. And every time I talk to operators or farmers that have had it done, I never hear a complaint that it didn't work to kill weeds, right? Or it didn't work on the fungicide front. Now, the complaint I will hear, though, is we streaked a field, right? You hear a lot about streaking. And so that's the major thing that I've been trying to educate and teach some people on, is if you're getting into it, or if you're going to hire somebody to come do it, make sure they do a pattern test and that they have figured out their swath correctly so that they can get those overlapping passes done right. Because as long as they can do that, we've been seeing some pretty effective applications come out of it. Now, the regulatory environment, that gets down a rabbit hole, and it's tough to recommend. Again, you got to follow the label is the law. So you have to be applying products that have an aerial application label. You got to be following their minimum carrier volumes, right? And a lot of those are 5 gallons per acre, stuff like that. So, you still have to follow the label, and you have to follow the aerial application label for drones. Now, there are a fair amount of products that do have that. The University of Missouri actually has a really good guide online where they went through a ton of different labels and pulled all of that information out on what would be legal and not legal for drones. But there's a lot more options than you think there would be. So again, follow those guidelines as close as possible. Make sure that we're registering the drones and getting, FAA approval and all of that kind of stuff. But once you do all of that, they have shown more effectiveness than I really initially thought we would ever see out of them. And so I think they definitely could have a fit. And then, like you mentioned, 5 years down the road, who knows where we'll be at if we're swarming, or we start doing more targeted applications where we don't necessarily have to fly an entire field. We just, beforehand, we can ID where the weeds are at, and the drone just goes and targets where the weeds are, right? And so maybe that's an option down the road here too. So I think there's some good opportunities. I would say I wouldn't expect me to be replacing a spray rig with a spray drone.
Very good.
Tommy, if I look across my area, there's quite a few drones that have showed up over the past 3 years, primarily for fungicides. But as those guys are really looking for places to expand their profit, expand their income, some days there's just not enough hours in the day to cover all the acres they need to from a fungicide standpoint to remain profitable. Is there a logical spot in your mind that if you're going to use a drone for a herbicide application, like where you'd start? Because I assume, based on carrier volume, that there's some products that it really doesn't make sense to put through a drone, even if they have a label.
So you'd be surprised. Let me start with that, right? On the products that don't make sense going through it. I don't have a good explanation for this, and I'm not recommending this because, again, it's off-label and everything else. But I did a research project where we were spraying paraquat out of a drone, and we did 2 GPA, 5 GPA, and 10 GPA ground rig comparison, right? 2 GPA with paraquat at a low label rate, and I had ryegrass that was knee-high, and we were getting the same level of kill as 10 gallons per acre of paraquat. I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, this just completely goes against everything we ever say in weed science, right? So I can't explain it. I definitely don't want to recommend that like full sale, right? Like, that's not where we want to go either, because I think there's a lot of risk with that too. But I have been just amazingly surprised as to what they can do. If you can give yourself a little hedge bets there. You can get your volume up a little bit. You pick the right droplet size. It really goes all back to like our ground rig conversations, right? You can minimize some of that risk. Now, as far as areas I would target, like, especially from a profitability standpoint, if I was in that drone operating business, I would honestly not necessarily target the field crop market right off the bat. I'd be talking to like electrical power line companies, right? Gas pipelines, rights of way, aquatic environments, ponds and lakes and all that kind of stuff, or irrigation ditches, or, anything else like that. Because, man, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Solar farms, that's the other one, right? So I've heard some guys trying to get into the solar farms area where it's difficult to use a four-wheeler sprayer or something else. You just can fly the drone and go. So kind of some of those more specialty things where it's tough to get a plane or a helicopter. You can't do, four-wheelers are tough. The terrain is, terrible. Man, there's some really good opportunities there for spray drones, and some really good opportunities to make up that business side of things, right? Make it more profitable for the actual operator. So that's probably where I would target first, and I would use the field crops kind of as the extra side of things.
Very good. Well, since we went down one rabbit trail, I've got another one for us, Tommy, with this idea of site-specific weed management. I'm thinking about Northwest Indiana. I've got a lot of variable soils, and a lot of our herbicide, rates are based on organic matter, soil texture. Recognize this as an engineering problem, right? To be able to rate control by herbicide, especially as you're tank mixing things that, you might have a few different, components to your mix. Any work that you're aware of that is being done in that space for that, what one might consider variable rate herbicide management, or your thoughts on that subject in general?
Yeah, actually, there's some work going on right here at Purdue. So Dr. Brian Young has a master's student. He's still working on it, but he's got 2 years of data now where they were looking at trying to variably rate some residual herbicides and figure out what soil characteristics we needed to make appropriate maps, right, to start doing that variable rate and everything else. Right now, I would say this is still kind of a pipe dream as well. We're still on the foundational levels. So, some of that research has indicated that like soil texture or soil organic matter alone doesn't tell you the whole story, that you really need like the electrical conductivity too. You need the EC.
Yes.
And so there's some work going on there where you kind of need to pull together the texture, the organic matter plus the EC, and kind of get this, this map of the field. Obviously, you also, the more resolution that you have with your soil samples and stuff, the more accurate you can be with some of that. And so then you get into some pretty narrow grid sampling and things like that right now at this point, which can be expensive and time consuming and everything else. So that's a limiting factor a little bit. But then the other thing that we're kind of seeing needs to fit into this equation that really hadn't been factored before is also just the weed density. Because if you don't have a whole lot of weed seed there and you don't have a historical weed problem there, you probably don't need to be using your max rate for that soil right there in that area. So that's kind of another piece to the puzzle that we're trying to add into that equation too, where it's the EC, the texture, the organic matter, but also can we identify what's in the seed bank or, historical pressures and factor that density into this a little bit as well. So that's definitely all ongoing. I will say we're kind of there already from an equipment standpoint to be able to do it per se. We kind of got to operate some things a little bit backwards, but we could do it. So, with a pulsing sprayer, in effect, you could basically, mix a certain label rate, and then you just tell the system, okay, or, you have your prescription map. If you're getting to this higher dose area, you basically would just up your volume, right? And then you would up your rate that goes out there. Or this may be an opportunity for something like the See and Spray Ultimate down the road, where we have the dual tank, dual boom system. Basically, instead of target applying to weeds, well, you have your broadcast rate, and when you need a higher rate, that's when your targeted boom turns on, and you target apply your higher rate at that point, right? And then you could get real specific. If you have the real specific field map, you could have individual nozzles turning on to give you your higher rates and everything else. And so then it would get real specific in a hurry. But again, it all kind of boils back to making sure we have that prescription map first, and we're still trying to work that piece out and get more precise in that area on that part of it. But definitely again, 5, 8, 10 years from now, who knows where we could be on that. There's a vast door open there.
Brian, Ben, anything else for the good of the cause? You've had a nice wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Butts here today. Hey, very good. Well, Tommy, this has been wonderful. I know with your experience, Western Nebraska, down to Arkansas, home in Wisconsin, you're probably pretty well plugged into the, extension, research, academic network. Who else could we talk to in the spirit of our Checking Up with the Doc series that you think would do it justice as well as you did today, or maybe come close, at least do their best?
Well, so just about everybody's going to do better than I would, right? So I'm always kind of the low man on the totem pole. But, there's a lot of really good, extension weed scientists out there. And so I think it all just depends on the topic, that you're looking for. So I'd hate to direct you one way or another. But, man, getting anybody out of the South just to talk more about what problems they're facing are always really good. There's some really good people doing cover crops research right now on some of that front, or looking at some other different herbicide injury standpoints and things like that. Even at Purdue, there might be some opportunities to talk to a couple of the engineers or people that are looking at some of the remote sensing things and some of these more robotic things we were talking about as well that could give you some insights on where that's looking in the future too. So, man, there's a whole gamut of people, and I'd hate to throw any names out there and miss somebody. So definitely, if you have any questions, let me know, but we could definitely find some more folks for you for sure.
Well, like I said, really appreciate the time that you gave us here today, Tommy. If folks wanted to follow along with your program or make contact with, yourself, students, the weed science department at large, how might you direct them to keep in touch or follow along with what you're doing, social media or otherwise?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of different ways. You can track us down or find information that we're putting out. We do have a weed science webpage, so it's at agag.purdue.edu/BTNY/Purdue Weed Science. And so you can find a bunch of we're actually trying to go through a process right now of updating that a little bit, but we have a bunch of information posted out there, publications, guides, hopefully some updates. I will say if y'all aren't signed up for the Purdue Pest and Crop newsletter, that's a great way to kind of hear all encompassing from the College of Ag, right? Whether it's us as weed scientists or the entomologists or plant pathologists, whoever else, that's a great way to kind of keep track of everything going on throughout the summer growing season and stuff. As far as me directly, I do have a Twitter or an X, I guess, that we are at now. And that's just at PU Weeds. So Purdue University Weeds, or Stinky Weeds, right? PU Weeds. So that's my tag. You can find me there. I'm trying to post some things, and between the X and our website and the newsletters and stuff, and hopefully some more podcasts like this, that's where we're trying to get all our information out there as much as possible in a timely fashion.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time today, Tommy. Looking forward to seeing what Dr. Butts' program contributes to Indiana growers at large, how to, manage weeds today, but then also 10 years down the road. So grateful for the time we got to spend. Brian Schrader, how might folks follow along with you and what's taking place in Northeast Indiana?
Sure. Probably if you want to reach out to me, email brian.schrader@pioneer.com is a good way. Instagram at B_K_Schrader. Ben, how about you?
Yep, you can find me on X at the Ben Jacob and on Facebook at Ben Jacob Agronomy. Carl?
Same places, Facebook at Joern Agronomy and on X at Joern. With that, we'll wrap up another edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast. Please give us a rating review that helps other folks like yourselves find us. And naturally, if you have any content that you would like to get an update on here as we round our way into planting season, spraying season, and things of that nature, please drop us a line. So with that, we will see you down the road. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.